Hi everyone, welcome back to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. They're always exciting for me. Glad on this episode to be talking a second time. So, returning guest Cathy Camper. Cathy, thank you for jumping in, talking with me for a few moments. And I am a little concerned about the large grasshopper and caterpillar that are currently, they look like they're surrounding you.
Well, that is something else I do besides write books. I do seed art mosaics with seeds.
Oh,
And
that's cool.
it's it's a whole nother story, but I used to live in Minnesota and they have a big seed art competition in their state fair every year in August. And so I started out, I was one of the originals that did alternative seed art kind of. Originally, it was very kind of cliched, like the Minnesota loon and, Elvis, that type of thing. So I started doing alternative people that I respected, like Frida Kahlo and Malcolm X. And then I also did these giant insects
That's
um,
cool.
because I bought a jigsaw and I was excited, like, oh, I could cut out the forms. So um, that's what's behind my head.
Oh,
And
so
if you
those
go,
are made of seeds.
yeah,
Oh,
the colors
wow.
are beans, and I've lost a bunch of art because bugs eat them, and sometimes
Mm-hmm.
mice broke in and ate them when I had them stored on the porch. But I have a bunch of them on my website if people want to go see more of the portraits that I did. And I just like showing off, the wonderful colors that seeds are. It's like some people paint the seeds, but I'm like, why do that? Let's show what the seeds actually are. And thousands of people go to the state fair, so it's a popular thing to do, like more popular than probably a museum show would be.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, I love the range here. We're talking seed art, and I always mention titles. So I'll mention 10 Ways to Hear Snow, Arab All Year Long. Bugs Before Time, I think, fits in with their
Yep.
visual.
Yep.
Um, and then you have the Lowrider series as well, which I think we talked about a good bit on the first episode that we had together.
Right, because that was comics, so that's
Mhm.
probably how we connected originally.
Yes, yeah. Well, I love the range of creativity that I'm seeing here. I love it. I think my first question is sort of what would you share with young readers who want to write, who want to create? What would be maybe some sage-like seeds of advice? See what I did there?
Yeah. Yeah. I think my advice would be to uh not not get stymied by feeling like you have to do something that's top of the form. Like so many people write to me and say, how can I publish a book? Mostly adults, but when I kind of question them, it's like they've never thought about writing, they've
Hmm.
never investigated, or maybe they haven't even read kids' books, but suddenly they want to write a book and get it published, like kind of overnight. And that's like kind of going like, I want to be a lawyer, but I don't want to go to school. I just want to become a lawyer or I want to be a
Hmm.
doctor. But I don't want to study or investigate what the job is like. So, but if you're a kid, I just say be playful about it and write whatever you want.
Hmm.
The other thing I think that's been my experience with the Lowrider books with Raúl is that we were friends that did zines, like little handmade magazines,
Hmm.
and so when we did a book together, we used those skills of collaboration. So if you're a kid that likes to write, maybe you have a friend that likes to draw, or maybe you have other writer friends and you can all write a chapter. I remember some kids I knew that back in the day wrote their own choose your own adventure book, and they had all these pages going every which way to follow which way you would follow the adventure. But I would say, do all that stuff instead of concentrating on this perfection of like, I have to publish or be the best. And that will come. But
Hmm.
the more you do, the more you try. And also don't be afraid to do it outside of school. Like a lot of times kids think that writing or doing an assignment, that's the only time they write a story. But when I was a kid, I used to carry a notebook around and write poems and write stories in there. And it's kind of like you're training yourself. And then as you get older, you're ready when those opportunities arise.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I am also a fan of the notebook approach, and it's a great way to capture ideas. And sometimes I realize when I'm writing something and it feels new and fresh, I'll look back in my notebook and go, "Oh, I thought about that like 3 years ago," and it's just now resurfacing. So, yeah,
Well,
it's
and
definitely.
also I know a lot of kids, a notebook probably sounds old school and it's like, well, I make notes on my phone and
Mhm.
whatever works because I obviously write stuff from the beginning on my computer a lot. But I also think that there is something about physically interacting with the paper and writing that's different than always being on the screen. And so I like to say, don't be afraid to do it off screen and especially as we're finding a lot of things for kids where the screens are stressful or there's too much screen time and I think it uses different parts of your brain kind of when you're writing or drawing and using your body more instead of just typing something. So um I kind of do both, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Love that. And same here. I love creating with the actual materials and then also digital, which is the digital is nice when you have to make a correction, of course, but
Oh,
sometimes it's
right.
nice to get paper, pencil, and just kind of create that way. Yeah. So the last time we talked, we spent a good bit of time talking comics, and I would be remiss if I did not give a little bit of a hat tip to that first conversation and to your work with Raúl on Lowriders. Raúl was on an episode a few weeks back, so just maybe a brief kind of recap of what makes comics this sort of special place for you as far as creating.
Well, I think comics are like being able to do a real cheap film. I
Uh-huh.
often think of that because, like, if you want to have a character that flies, you can just draw him flying and have that happen the whole story. Whereas if you were to make a film, you'd have to figure out how to do it and figure out the cost of doing it. And, it would involve a lot more. Whereas in comics, you can kind of just do whatever you want that way.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
Also, I think the I've been thinking I been rereading some books by Dickens, our mutual friend. Just
Ah,
I never read that, and when I was in college, I did a lot of studies. I concentrated on Victorian illustration, and back then, um, like a lot of the books, like Dickens, would come out serialized, so you'd get a couple chapters every month or so, and with it, you would get two plates, two illustrations, and people would take those illustrations and put them on their walls and talk about them. And um, a lot of times the illustrations included some important um, insight into the story. So, it might be a hero and heroine, but in the illustration, you see that, that they're frowning at each other or that something else is going on. So it meant that you had to work with the story and the pictures and know how to read the pictures. And I thought about that a lot in doing comics. And I think Raul and I were lucky that we got to work together and could set those kind of things up. Like there's
mhm.
a lot of places where I would say, I'd make a note to him, here's the text, but make sure you show this. And then likewise, he would sometimes go, hey, what if I add this? So there's a lot of that in the Lowriders books, and I think it makes it really special. Some comic books you don't have that collaborative interaction,
Mhm.
so it's kind of more straight. And I think there's also a lot of comic books that are just pretty straight narrative, like Raina Telgemeier's is a good example where, it's telling a story and the pictures pretty much reflect what's in the story, whereas in Lowriders, you kind of go off all over the place into black holes and stuff like that. So, I mean, that's another reason why comics are great because it's kind of up to the creator how you want to use the format.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and just knowing a little bit about you and a little bit about Raul, I imagine it seems like you both have that playful side as well as this brilliance about the work as well. So I think that comes through in that book series.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think we were lucky. I mean, we it was kind of by chance we met, but we have similar like we both did outreach to kids. So
Mhm.
we'd worked with parents and kids and teachers, and we kind of knew what people wanted and the ways we wanted to connect with them, so it was a really good match.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, we did not, at least as memory serves, we didn't talk that much about picture books the last time we talked. So
Yeah.
I'm curious about what that format, I guess you could call it a format, medium,
Yeah, no, it's
allows you to do.
definitely. Well, I think to me, a picture book is really like writing a poem. And it
Mhm.
feels like from the outside, when like a lot of times adults will be like, oh, yeah, I'm going to write a picture book. It takes at least a year, often years to write it because every word has to be right. But
Mhm.
also, you're still working with the pictures telling an important part of the story.
Mhm.
So figuring out what is in the text versus what you give up to the pictures and kind of that play back and forth. Um, Traditionally in picture books, you don't have collaboration like the way Raúl and I did. So in mine, the editor is the go-between. So they work with me on the text until the text is pretty tight. And then they send that to the illustrator, and the illustrator will make sketches of the pages. And then, the editor will come back to me with the sketches and we'll go over those and see what needs to be changed, and then it goes back to the illustrator. So, the illustrator and the writer aren't talking to each other directly. And I think as a writer, you need to be able to just kind of give up and go, the illustrator has a vision. It's never going to be what's in my head exactly, you know.
Mhm.
So it's weird if you think about it's hard to take a story that's in your head and put it exactly into a movie or something. Like I think of the movie you see in your head, like when you read a story or when you make up a story. Um, and it's not like you can say exactly what everything is.
Mhm.
So then when an illustrator gets it, they have a totally different movie in their head. And sometimes I can give input, but sometimes they're like, no, this is my artistic work now, and this is how I see it. So I think learning that things can work, multiple ways. You just, like sometimes I'd be like, wow, that's not at all what I pictured, but it works great. And then there's a few things I'll usually argue about when they're really key to the story, you know,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
like and I think even the same with Raúl and I, we both have to give up some of the things we wanted and that's what collaboration is. And I think that that's also if you're going to get into making anything where in publishing, you lose control because the publisher now owns it too. So the
Mhm.
editor and the art director, they have say too. And for people that are very like, no one can touch my work, they're kind of in for a surprise.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There's that give and take.
Yeah. And I guess I should also say, like my picture books, 10 Ways to Hear Snow is very kind of a quiet, poetic book. And
Mhm.
it's for younger kids. So it was sort of funny when it came out. It was 2020, so it was a COVID book, but teachers and parents, everybody really fell behind it. I was really lucky. And I think
Yeah.
it came out right when Trump won the or he lost the election. So everybody had this kind of like, I just need quiet and nature and peace, after
Mm-hmm.
4 years of all this craziness. So it was lucky that it kind of met the zeitgeist of where people were. But that said, I feel like my Lowriders audience and 10 Ways to Your Snow, totally different people. I don't think that they even know the other books exist sometimes. So it's kind of funny. Like one review of 10 Ways to Hear Snow was like, Kathy's first book or something like that. And I thought, well, not exactly. But I think that well, one thing that's good is that 10 Ways to Your Snow was translated to Spanish. So
Mm-hmm.
there is now that crossover for readers, the Lowriders readers to find it. And then Arab All Year Long is more, it goes through the months of the year and just talks about things Arab kids do. And I felt I'm Lebanese American on my dad's side, and I felt like I never saw books that talked about kind of contemporary Arabs. Like a lot of times you see like, oh, they're in the desert with camels, or um,
Mm-hmm.
or also secular Arab activities. Like there are a lot of Muslim Arabs, but there's Christian Arabs, there's non-religious Arabs. So I wanted to try and incorporate some of those things kind of in the book. So it just tells different things kids do, like learning to drum and making henna tattoos and just things like that. And there's brief notes at the back. But I also felt like from all my school visits, it's something teachers and educators could use because you could talk about, like this boy's learning to drum. Have you ever learned to drum? And
Mm-hmm.
what in many cultures, or there's a boy that learns to write Arabic, and you have to write it the opposite of English from right to left, and so talk about what languages do you write and which direction do the words go and things like that. So I felt like while it was about my culture, I wanted it to reach out to kids of all cultures to feel like, how can I talk about these things that I know too?
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. And I'm just thinking about how much information gets put into a small space with picture books, and there's such a dose of information that's there, and there's so much beauty packed into just a short space.
Yeah, and I mean, I was thinking when I wrote that, even if you're a kid that's traveled, it isn't until you get older that you really understand like the world and like countries on the globe, sort of like adults tell you, you went from France to America or whatever, but it's almost like second or third grade, I think, where it kind of starts fitting in like the time and all that stuff. So I was remembering when I was little, some of that stuff, it's like, yeah, that sounds great. But but I think adults forget that sometimes, that kids um, are learning all that real basic stuff still.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, well, I'm curious about what has your creative attention at the moment, and that could be anything from books to education. I know you're an educator as well, to seed art, to anything that we haven't even mentioned yet.
Yeah, well, Raúl and I are talking about probably some more lowrider stuff coming.
Wonderful.
So that's in the works. All this stuff, of course, depends on the publisher going yes and writing you a contract. But he and I had some good conversations, and our publisher seems like interested. So that's cool. I just finished a picture book that I hope gets published. It's called The Man Who Used Magnets to Hold Up His Pants.
Oh, I love it.
And
I see
it's
the picture in my head.
yeah, yeah, right. And it's a silly book, obviously, but it's also all about magnets and how magnets work. And I part of the research was I had to make sure that magnets actually could hold up your pants.
Nice.
So at least for pajamas, I was able to make it work. So fingers crossed that ends up finding a publisher, but you never know. Um, I have a book that I'm trying to find an agent for called Circle A. That's about some kids in the 80s, some younger kids that meet some older punk kids squatting a house.
Mhm.
And it's a lot about that when you meet older kids and they open up the world for you, like here's music, here's writing, here's artwork. But also they do a lot of stuff like guerrilla gardening and graffiti, billboard alterations. So there's a sort of social justice aspect to it. And I liked setting it in the past because I think if like writing it today, there's so much with social media and stuff that would make it really hard to write, kind of because it's like you don't know what's going to happen and it dates things so quickly.
Hmm.
So sometimes setting stuff in the past gives you a little distance, but I think a lot of the messages in it are contemporary. You know, it talks about sexuality and identity and kind of a coming of age story. So I hope that I can, find an agent to rep it. But again, all these things are like, just keep trying.
Yeah,
And
that persistence as an author, absolutely.
yeah, and last year, I wrote a big article for School Library Journal about zines, which is something I'm passionate about. And so I'm also going to write up a pitch for a book about zines for kids. So
Awesome.
I've been kind of tossing ideas and looking at what's already out there. So I think that might be something I get to do too. But
Okay.
and again, it goes back to your original question for kids that want to write. I mean, I'm talking about all these things, and maybe one might become a book,
Mhm.
and I think people only hear what people are bragging about, but they don't see the piles of ideas that get rejected. And I've read a lot of bios recently of actors, and Hollywood is so full of heartbreak. Just
Mhm.
like imagine having people look at you and go, "Well, you just don't look right for this character, so you don't even get a chance." It's just those kind of judgments are you got to be really tough to pick yourself up and go, okay, we'll come up with another idea. And I
Um,
think in writing, there's a lot of that too.
yeah, almost every writer I talk to on here mentions, "Oh, I've got this idea, but it's in a drawer and it'll probably stay there." So there's definitely, it is a process. It is absolutely a process.
And there's a lot of luck involved. Like it basically you have to connect with somebody that believes in your idea enough to put a lot of money behind it. And that also means the timing has to be right in the
Mm.
culture. And so on the one hand, it's like keep trying because the rejections are the people that don't get it. But on the other hand, sometimes you can't break through because the timing is just wrong. And like if somebody just came out with a book or a movie about a talking car and you have a book about a car that talks, then that's not probably going to get accepted. So
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, it's amazing how the universe has to line up in that way. Absolutely.
yeah, and I mean, like Raúl and I even joke it was so weird that we met across the times, and that we both just connected really well, that we both had the same work ethic and the same vision, you
Hmm.
know and I can think of lots of collaborations I've had in the past where, it just crashed because the people we weren't on the same wavelength, basically, so
Yeah. You have to find your people.
yep, yep.
Yeah. So you mentioned you have a website. Any other spaces online or points of connection we should mention for listeners?
I'm on Facebook a lot just because for writers, it's easier to write. I'm on Instagram. I am on Twitter, but I hate going there. So,
Yep.
it's sort of like every a couple weeks, I'm like, oh, did anybody post anything here I should check? Um, but yeah, I mean, if you really wanted to connect with me, just go to my website because that has contacts. So
Great, great. And I think my final question is, when you're creating the seed art that's back there,
yeah.
do you have a base? Like, do you cut it out first and then sort of glue on, or do you kind of form it
Yeah,
with the
so what it
seeds? Okay.
is I usually use very thin masonite. Some people prefer cardboard or plywood. Um, you don't want anything too heavy because it's just makes everything more heavy, like to carry
Mhm.
around. So I usually sketch directly on the plywood. Sometimes I use an opaque projector to kind of get the outlines. And then so I do that with pencil, but I'm constantly like a lot of times before I even choose what I'm drawing, I've kind of broken down what seeds I have available and that they'll work for that.
Hmm.
Because if you think of the range of seeds, the colors are really heavily towards browns and yellows, and you get a
Hmm.
little bit of green, little red, not much blue, so you have to be creative in your in how you see things and also the size of the seeds. Like you might have yellow corn, but that's really big. And so will that work for the parts you have that are yellow? So over the years of doing it, I kind of know my palette, but I like to push, like I just like to push it and go like, oh, here's this really weird, cool seed. How can I use this? So when I moved to Oregon, of course, there's all these different Oregon seeds, but to enter the Minnesota contest, they have to be Minnesota crop seeds, not even weed seeds, or you get points off. So
Oh, wow.
they're very picky. And I kind of don't really care about the ribbons and the grading. I just like to do it. But I, um, I tend to use like I'll use those big pods for the hair, or
Mm-hmm.
um, I did one there's some weed seed out here that's very fluffy and it's a vine that grows on everything. So I used it for Bob Dylan's hair.
Oh,
And now
nice, nice.
whenever I see it, it's like, oh, there's Bob Dylan's hair because I don't know what the weed is called. But it looked really cool. It's kind of fluffy and like a dandelion type seed. Um, so for me, I'm pretty playful, but now there's people that like they literally push every poppy seed with a pin into place. And if you search it online, it's become a really big event at the fair. Like they have two lines to go through and see it. One is kind of a slow line of people that want to really look, and the other is like a faster line where people can rush through more, I guess. And but it's brought me a lot of adventures. I did some of my seed art was in Amy Sedaris's book, and I did
Oh,
seed art for
cool.
her. And I got to work with the artist Andy Goldsworthy, who is a kind of earth artist, because another friend of mine was asked, they needed some volunteers at the Chicago Museum years ago. And so I guess that's the other thing, it's like people think that everything that success only comes through these high up, kind of lofty official things. Whereas I've had as many adventures doing these weird things like crop art, because then your work gets in the newspaper, and then people are like, well, who is this person and why did you do it? And it's like if you have fun that way, it just leads to fun adventures, I guess.
I love that. Love as I mentioned, the range of creativity. And Kathy, I'm always glad to talk with you. So I hope we can schedule a third talk at some point in the future as well.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, I'd
Yep,
love it. I'm glad you remembered me. And
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely.
check out the seed art because I think it'll make you laugh some of it.
Yeah, yeah. Um, well, I appreciate the time and talk again soon.